Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Murray, and I'm the editor of Collateral. And I am here today with Teruko Nimura, and we are going to be talking about her work. And this is for our spring issue that'll be going live on May 15th. And Teruko has a lot of different sculpture work to talk about, a lot of range. Um, and I'm just so glad that she's here to talk with us about the impact of her work. And we'll see in some of the discussion too, how her work touches on the theme of Collateral's mission. So welcome. Thank you for
Thank
being
you so
here.
much. I'm so happy to be here. Be here.
Well, I'm really glad to have you. I'm really interested. I really like hearing artist stories about how they chose different mediums, especially when they work in multiple mediums. And so I want to know a little bit more about how you first approached why sculpture, why this art form.
Well, I started out doing drawings mainly. I loved like pencil and charcoal, and those are both really um, physical mediums. You smudge them, you erase them, I ended up using it almost as though I was rendering in 3 dimensions because it was a flat surface, but I would create form out of these sort of blobs of flat color. And so I kind of moved sort of naturally to clay from that, which is also a really tactile medium. And I think I've always been drawn to things that include or activate the senses, just personally, but also um, with things, just my enjoyment of life, like my experiences and things. So I think from drawing and touching the paper and the graphite, went to clay, and then from clay, I did a lot of sort of rendering the body and doing traditional uh, sort of figures in the in clay, and enjoyed that, but it was so technical. And so there's so much to learn with clay, and I still love it. But um, going to grad school, I had so many disasters with clay that I actually went in with an emphasis on clay, and then started jumping to things that I could get my ideas out easier. And that was fabric, and that was paper, still sculptural mediums, tactile mediums, but they had less technical obstacles, I feel like. Um, and then that just led me to installation. So I kind of like jumped, I feel like, in this sort of natural progression for me, to starting with just the love of the tactile, and then the installations, I feel like, with fabric and paper were really um, um, they were able to activate all senses. So it was like satisfying that like desire to use or to appreciate the senses in my work.
Yeah, well, and when I think of graphite and charcoal and smudging, you were saying like that's an art form that it quite literally rubs off on you. You carry marks, you're marked by your art. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you can almost see where the artist has been just by looking at her hands. And so,
Yeah. Well, I did a performance actually piece, one of the only public performance pieces that I did, that was using a sculptural thing that I made out of paper, but I used charcoal as well. And it ended up being that it was like I was drawing on these objects almost with the smudging of the charcoal. So it
Mhm.
was interesting that you say that, because I was starting to bridge all of these things together, like all the mediums just started mixing around and then just expanded into installation and performance work.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned too that your work is physical work, that it started in drawing, which is physical, and so is sculpture, because I think we often forget that art is physical, including the literary arts, writing out or typing, that is
Mhm.
something that we have to use our bodies for. So
Mhm.
our bodies are present in our work as well. I'm glad that you mentioned that because not very many people bring that up.
I think it was always also easier for me to create, to understand a form in space rather than try to make the illusion of it. Like
Mm.
I couldn't in two dimensions. So say with drawing or something, you have to use color and your understanding of light to create a form. But in sculpture, you create the form and that's where you start. So I could touch it and I could see it and move it around. And that's how my brain could understand it. Like it was easier for me to um, to know it, and study it. That
Yeah. Did you grow up like, did you become an artist at a very young age? Did you recognize yourself as an artist when you were young?
I was always like doing these like periodic exclamations of like, I'm bored, like all the time, I'm bored. And my sister started packing me these little backpacks of she called them my board bags. And they had things to help me because I was always just needing to do something. And so I think I started drawing really early as a way to like divert some of my anxious energy, I think, and it helped to calm me, from not having it helped with my hands busy. I was able to focus and my mind and could calm down and be more clear. And she recognized that pretty early, I think, and always had I I would go into my room and just draw all over my body with like I wanted to cover myself in like color for some reason. So there
Yeah.
would be lots of marker just like all everywhere. And my parents didn't discourage it. Like they were okay with it. You know, it washed off, it was fine. So I think with that, like non-shaming of, like they let me do that and they encouraged me to do that. I think that helped to cultivate just that, like being an artist is just what I want to do and what I can, what it's okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to recognize it as art. And I think sometimes we can tend not to recognize art when it is in the bodies and hands of young people. And so to, hear that they embrace that and also saw the practical reality that, colors wash off. Um,
Yeah.
and so why
Instead
not,
of like, yeah.
yeah, why not embrace it? And actually that's one of the things I wanted to say about your work is that in looking at your different projects, all of them really, the common observation I have is that they have such a freedom of movement, in not just in the three-dimensional form but also across the color spectrum. There's always great contrast in your work, bright yellows and reds up against dark browns and blacks, um, and I see that as movement. It appears that your sculptures are moving. um, how do you perceive, as an artist, how do you perceive movement in sculpture?
I think I like to use repetition and color to create movement in static sculptural objects. And I think for me, they express more when I'm asking the viewer to move with the work, like with their eye or with their body. So with the way that I use repetition a lot, or detail, I like to like create an impression with an overall object, and then hopefully the details or the all the little things that are in the work bring the viewer closer, and that movement of discovery or leaning in toward the work um, creates another layer of experience, I feel like, for the or understanding for the viewer. So the details are important. And then I'm hoping that once they see the details that brought them in, that they get again move back and look again with the detail now understood or in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I try with the work to have these layers of experience for the viewer, to ask them to actively engage with the looking process in like stages. So,
Yeah.
so I think with movement, yeah, that's kind of not only visually, but sort of with the viewer in mind and their body and their experience of the work.
Yeah. It's funny that you say, clay was so technical when I look at the origami work that you've done and it seems very technical to me. I have yet to fold a paper crane without ripping it. So to see such fine detail, the fine creases, the fine point, the bend versus the break. Um, that's something that I see in your work. So it's funny when you say, I'm like, what are you talking about?
The definition of technical moves around.
Well, and when you talk about the viewer of your work too, I wondered, and this wasn't a question that I had sent to you beforehand, but I wonder, people always ask about, who is your audience, and but I want to ask you, who is your audience? Who do you hope that who do you want to reach most with your work? Not necessarily who may be experiencing your art, but is there an audience that you want to reach that you may not have yet? Is there an ideal audience for your work?
Hmm, an ideal audience. I feel like I I feel like I I always hope to shift perspective somehow. And maybe it's like my ideal audience is somebody who maybe doesn't see a lot of art or like thinking about art, or but there's some way that they access it, say it's like a public piece that I've done or something they encounter outside that I've made, that I think I ideally is somebody that um I I've sparked something in that maybe they didn't realize, and it doesn't have to be like the art world or
Yeah.
anything, you know. Um yeah, so uh, any regular person that like
No, that makes sense. I think, especially because your work touches on, some universal human themes that, apply to all of us. Um, War impacts all of us, not just the people who are sculpting and are curating and visiting museums. It impacts all of us. So I think I think that makes sense. And I feel connected to you in that as a poet, my ideal audience is someone who is suspicious of poetry. Because I like to say I'm suspicious of it as well.
Yeah. Yes. That's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me about viewers readers of Collateral will have a link to your work. But can you tell me a little bit about For Every Sadako? And, you know, I want to know how this project was conceived and prepared and presented. It was the first of your work that I saw. And I went to, this is just a side story. I went to Catholic school when I was very, very young in Puyallup, Washington. And the nuns used to walk us from our school down to the site where Camp Harmony was. And
Mm.
Japanese and Japanese Americans were behind fences there. My grandmother remembers playing with kids on the other side of the
Mm.
fence and like kicking
Wow.
the ball and running up and down.
Mm.
Uh, and it's now the fairgrounds. You know, this place where you hear happy squeals
Mm.
of people on rides and eating cotton candy. And the nuns used to walk us down there and tell us what had taken place there and what was still there on the land. So when I saw For Every Sadako and having read the book, which is for children
Mhm.
and young adults, that was very powerful to me. It brought me back to when I was small and when I was first starting to realize that grown-ups could be evil. And that's really disturbing as a kid to
Yeah.
learn, because your parents are constantly telling you you need to be kind, you need to be respectful, because otherwise you're going to fail at being an
Mm.
adult. And then when
Mm.
we're young, we inevitably learn that some adults miss the memo. And
Mm.
you know, so could you tell me, just, I mean, anything you want to tell me about For Every Sadako?
Well, when I was 6 years old, I went to Japan with my parents and sister, and we went to the Hiroshima Peace Park, which has a giant monument to Sadako. And I think of it now, looking back, that it was like the first public art piece that I encountered, and it made a huge impact on me because not only was it the first time I understood that a child could die, and I was a child at the time,
Yeah.
that but that like the reason that she died was not, was external, and it was something that was imposed upon her, and then of course the whole tragedy of Hiroshima. And I also um, learned to fold cranes on that trip. So it was a very tactile experience too, going to the site, experiencing the monument, learning the story, and then connecting with this other child that died, and realizing that I could die too. And then the following year, my father died unexpectedly. And so that was this huge, life event. And I think through that loss, and in turn, that kind of loss of a connection to my culture, or that side of my culture, because my mother is Filipino American. Um, I've had this great desire to like connect with Japanese culture and craft, in an attempt to like connect again with my father in some ways. So um, I think that story just stayed with me, and it continues to influence so much of my work. And now that we have so much tragedy too in the world that I just can't fathom, and it overwhelms me on a daily basis, I think back to how I can process all of that. And it's just through making, I guess, and like
Yeah.
trying to express or understand or communicate through making. And so that it was inspired by the legend of the cranes, and this wish for humanity really to wake up and realize, with the coffin, it's the mirrored coffin, that it's that if the viewer is looking at this object, then they're implicated in this reality, that you either have the potential to um make this world better, or with in terms of well, anything, I suppose, but or you kind of stand by the wayside and become complicit. So that mirror is meant to bring the viewer in more, like pull them in more beyond just a spectator, but as their face, if they look down, it's the cranes are above them. You can see that they become part of the work,
Yeah.
and it's almost dependent on them too.
Yeah. Definitely. And it's a dialogue piece. Like the reader needs to experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
and having known that you were 6 years old when you went to Japan and experienced that, the coffin and the mirror in particular has a new meaning. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's a horrible new meaning, and but it is also um, terribly vulnerable. And you're inspiring other artists in the making to make through
Mm-hmm.
this devastation that like we can't even really articulate. It's gotten so bad. um, do you
Yeah.
do you have um, what are your fears in creating? I mean, I have my own as a poet, but I think all artists have kind of honestly a string of fears. We could just list over and over, I'm afraid that, I'm afraid
Yeah.
that. Um, and have pages and pages, or worse, some kind of Mobius strip of fear.
Yeah. That's more like it cycles on
Yeah.
and of itself. Absolutely. Yes. I
What
think
are your
fear
fears?
is definitely there almost every time I try to attempt to make anything. The fear that I won't be able to make it, fear that I like won't be able to say what I want to say, fear that what I want to say is stupid or not, worth saying, and fear that I'm not doing enough. It's like so much fear all the time. But
Yeah.
it definitely, sadly, but it's a it is does motivate. And I I know this last couple of weeks I did a really intense proposal for a public art project that I am hoping to get at Bainbridge Island, and um I was afraid the whole time that I was making it that I couldn't. I was like, I can't, I'm just not ready. This is not, I can't do it. But I pushed through that fear, and I surprised myself that what I could do. Like I actually was able to like communicate what I wanted. I feel really happy with where the proposal went. And I'm just hoping, that it gets accepted. But I I think that it getting to the other side of that fear, that's art making for me, and so too. Like
Yeah, you say you push through it, and I wonder, I feel artists are always trying to learn from one another, especially when it comes to enduring and processing our own fears. In that experience in particular, then with this proposal, how did you push through it? You know,
I think
hindsight is a wonderful thing, and now you look back and you said that you surprised yourself, but how did you do it?
I just I wanted it so badly. I just feel like it's such an amazing project. It's part of the Japanese American Exclusion Memorial. It was a call for art um, to be put upon on the existing memorial or supplement the existing memorial. And I just really um, it was such a wonderful project, like, that I just wanted it so badly. I don't know. That's all I can think of to say for that is it just seemed like the perfect opportunity, and I just um had to. That's had to had to get through it.
Yeah. Well, really embracing the want, and I mean, want is an action. It's something that we do. It's not something static. Um, so wanting something is a way of pushing
Mhm.
something. It
Mhm.
makes sense to me. Um, so
Mhm.
before I get completely off track, Every Sadako started when I would say, when you were 6 years old. Um, how did you start it when you began working with materials for the installation?
I've been working with folding cranes for a while, and just the potential of like what just that gesture could communicate on its own. Like, I mean, knowing the legend and knowing like this cultural um, connection in the story. Sorry, my child is like screaming. I don't know if you can hear that.
I can hear that, and I'm so glad it's not my kid.
Yeah. Oh, what's going on? But and I'm starting to explore more what materials, like the inherent language of materials and what materials can say on their own, but also then that gesture of and how that can build meaning too.
Mhm.
So I think that I was using the cranes a lot, and then and just because of all of the wars and just the atrocities that are happening around the world, I had to use my lens somehow to talk about it,
Mhm.
and that was the story that came to me, really to address, all the injustices that are happening now around the world.
Yeah.
It was so not sure if I answered your question there.
And thinking about, just at the tail end of your response, and you are acknowledging the impact of war on so many of us too, which we talked about in the beginning of the interview. We often talk about the impact of war on art and on artists, and Collateral specifically is publishing work um, that examines the impact beyond the combat zone. So not the battle story, but the ramifications, the long lasting ripple effects of
Mhm,
violent
mhm.
conflict. But I wondered, do you see it as reciprocal? And I'm asking this, I guess, just as um, artist to artist, because I'm curious. Do you see art having an impact on violence in the world?
I have to hope that there is, some sort of impact, that we are dampening it somehow, whether it be just at the smallest level where we we spark something in somebody and they, decide that they want to be more involved in activism, or they some things changes their perspective somehow. And like my only like my greatest hope is that we just affect and humanity, like that we can show through our work like what kind of damage that can have, like emotional, physical, and that it helps to like reveal that humanity and stop the othering of the enemy. And
Mhm.
somehow um I have to hope that, like, I don't know if like there's a real quantifiable um impact, but um I have to
Yeah, I
hope that.
understand that. Just the repetition of, I have to hope that, because, I'm unfamiliar with what the alternative is.
Yeah.
The alternative to hope isn't something that I'm familiar with, I guess. Um, that makes sense. That's something to think about. Um, do you have like an artistic, speaking of like repetition and how to keep going, um, in spite of the horrible things that, spark our work? Um, do you have like an artistic philosophy or mantra? Do you have something that always comes to mind that keeps pushing you forward?
I think that losing um my father at such a young age, and then having that awareness so early of death and loss, I think that I like thinking of every day as a gift is kind of the only thing that kind of I feel like keeps me going, is that you don't ever know, but every day what can you do, and how can you make use of that day, and every day is a gift, like
Yeah,
that's it.
that makes sense. And it's something that I think I needed to be reminded of that. Um, before I conclude the interview, I wanted to know, do you have any works in process right now that Collateral readers could check out? This interview will be featured on May 15th, but if you have stuff that's coming out in 2021, I'd love to know about it.
Thank you. Yes, so I was accepted as an artist for the Public Art Reaching Community Program through the city of Tacoma. And I was a cohort of, I believe, 10 or 12 artists, and we did sort of like a training session with the city. And one of we were also enlisted to create a work, a temporary public project um, through in Tacoma. So mine, we some of them launched already, some of them got delayed. Mine got delayed because of location and the pandemic and what have you. And so I'm going to be launching that sometime, either early summer, late spring, not quite sure, at one of the parks in Tacoma. And the piece is about basically the pandemic and this fear of like um, losing the ability to relate to one another and this hope that we can come back together. And it's composed of I'm using the prayer flags basically. And if you can see behind me, there's this black
Yeah.
so I'm that's one of the sketches for the work, but it's going to be this 12 by 12 foot series of flags, and they'll be all cut up in strands, and then it'll be a circle, and it'll be it's hard to explain, but it will be on when you approach the work, it looks like the circle is not evident, you can't see it. But when you walk around the work, the circle emerges. And so all the flags create the image of the circle. So I'm trying to express a feeling of unity, that the chaos is that we move past the chaos and find the right perspective. And there it is. We're connected again.
Yeah.
That's the goal of the work. And it should be up for a couple weeks, probably out in one of the parks. And I can hopefully, if it happens before the issue comes out, I'll let you know the specifics. But I'm still working through those with the city.
Okay. Yeah. Again, with the movement of your work, the viewer has to move around it in order to see what emerges. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And people can follow you on social media. Can you share how people can do that?
Yeah, that my handle is my name's Teruko Nimura _art. And that's basically my main, I share a lot of my process on that. Um, and finished works and things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, hopefully people will follow you on Instagram. I follow you on Instagram. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you so much, Abby.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teruka. This has been really helpful. I mean, I want to go back and look at all of your art again now, getting to know you a little bit and carrying that into experiencing your work, I think makes it all the richer.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for joining me.